Welcome to ESL Listening Practice.
Hello, everyone.
We are so thrilled to have you with us today. We're jumping straight into a topic that, you might have experienced yourself recently.
Yeah, or perhaps you've noticed it happening to the people around you. It's incredibly common right now.
Exactly. Today, we are sharing our own personal research and insights into a profound, modern, global issue. And if you are an intermediate English learner, specifically at the B2 level, you are in exactly the right place.
You really are. Our mission today is very specific. We're going to unpack the complex vocabulary and the profound concepts behind why loneliness is becoming the new global problem.
Right. Our goal is to help you elevate your vocabulary. We want to move you from those simple, functional, everyday words to the kind of sophisticated, nuanced language that native speakers use to discuss psychology and society.
Because, that transition from functional English to emotional and societal English is often the hardest hurdle for learners.
Oh, absolutely.
When you first learn a language, you learn how to order coffee, right? How to ask for directions. You learn how to survive.
Just the absolute basics.
Right. But when we analyze global issues, the language we use becomes incredibly important because it reflects our shared humanity.
That's a great way to put it. The words we choose actually shape how we understand a problem.
Exactly. So today, we are going to act as your guides. We'll be breaking down the exact phrasing, the prefixes, the suffixes, and those hidden cultural meanings behind the English words used to describe human isolation.
So we want you to actively listen today. Not just to the dictionary definitions, but to the rich context and the cultural weight we are providing.
So let's get right into our findings.
Let's do it. In our recent research, we noticed that sociologists and medical professionals have started to talk about a new global problem.
And they're no longer just calling loneliness a sad feeling, are they?
No, they really aren't. Now, for you listening, when you hear the word pandemic, what instantly comes to your mind?
For most B2 learners, and honestly for most native speakers until fairly recently, this word is strictly medical.
Totally. It brings up images of hospitals, masks, global lockdowns.
It definitely carries a massive historical weight.
Right.
If we look at the strict definition we used in our research, a pandemic is a problem or disease that spreads widely across many countries and affects a large number of people.
Historically, we use this word almost exclusively for viruses, like a flea pandemic.
Right, or other massive health crises. But I want to focus on how the English language naturally evolves to capture the severity of a social situation.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, by taking a strictly medical word like pandemic and attaching it to an emotion like loneliness, we are doing something very specific in English.
We're using it metaphorically.
Exactly, metaphorically. We are signaling to the listener that this is not just a minor individual inconvenience.
It's a contagion.
Yes, it is spreading across borders, it's affecting millions of lives, and it is largely out of control.
But, okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
When I first saw that phrase in our research, my immediate thought was, isn't that just a bit of dramatic clickbait?
That's a very fair reaction.
Right. Taking a word that describes a literal physical virus and applying it to someone just feeling sad on a Friday night, it feels a bit extreme. Does loneliness really qualify for a word that heavy?
It is a totally valid skepticism. And, if loneliness were just the feeling of missing out on a Friday night party, then yes, calling it a pandemic would be a huge exaggeration.
Right.
But the data we found paints a much darker picture. It qualifies as a pandemic because of the sheer scale.
The numbers were staggering.
They really were. We are looking at reports showing that in some developed nations, up to 60% of adults report feeling lonely on a regular basis.
60%. That is not just a localized issue.
No, that is a systemic failure of human connection. The metaphor works beautifully because, just like a virus, modern loneliness is often invisible.
That's so true. You cannot see it when you walk down the street.
But it is moving from house to house, city to city.
That makes a lot of sense. It is a powerful metaphor precisely because it takes something invisible and makes it feel like an urgent, tangible global threat.
Exactly.
But, as we noted in our findings, loneliness is obviously not a biological virus. You cannot catch it from someone coughing on a subway car.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. No, it is a psychological condition. And here's where I want to linger for a moment, because the word psychological is one of those words that carries a lot of cultural nuance for English learners.
It really does, and a tricky spelling, too.
Oh, yes. Let's talk about the spelling for a second. Psychological starts with a silent P. Psychological.
That silent P trips up so many learners.
It really does. But to define it simply, psychological means something connected to the mind and emotions, rather than the physical body.
It actually comes from the Greek root psyche, which means soul or mind. When native speakers use the word psychological, they're usually drawing a very clear boundary. They're separating mental states from physical states.
Like if you break your leg skiing, that is physical.
Right. The doctor puts a cast on it, you can see the break.
But if you are experiencing a deep, unshakable sense of loneliness, that is psychological.
And what I find so interesting is how native speakers use this word to validate an experience.
What do you mean by validate?
Well, because in many cultures, if an illness isn't physical, it isn't treated as real.
Oh, I see.
You can't put an X-ray up on a light board and show someone a broken heart or a lonely mind.
That is such a profound point. By officially labeling loneliness a psychological condition, our research elevates it.
Yes. It tells the sufferer, yes, this is happening in your mind, but it is a legitimate condition.
It is not a weakness of character.
Exactly. It requires attention, care, and professional understanding just as much as a broken leg does.
I think that validation is so crucial for people to hear. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of our research, this psychological condition happens when people feel socially disconnected.
Disconnected. That is the next vital piece of vocabulary we need to examine today.
The definition we establish for our B2 learners is being separated from others or lacking meaningful relationships.
I want to talk about how this word is built, actually, because it perfectly illustrates how English constructs meaning.
Oh, I love breaking down words like this.
You take the base word, connected, which means joined together or linked. Then you add the prefix dis, D-I-S.
The prefix is incredibly common in English.
It is everywhere, and it almost always means the opposite of or the absence of the base word.
So respect becomes disrespect.
Right. Agree becomes disagree.
And connected becomes disconnected. It completely reverses the feeling of connection.
But what I really love about the word disconnected is how visual it is. We actually borrowed this word from the world of technology.
That's true, we did.
Think about a telephone line being physically unplugged from the wall, or a computer suddenly losing its Wi-Fi signal.
That is a literal mechanical disconnection.
Exactly. But when we apply it to human beings, that technological imagery remains in our minds. A disconnected person is someone whose invisible wires to the rest of humanity have been severed.
You know, that technological imagery perfectly describes an experience I had a few years ago.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
Well, I had just moved to London for work. I didn't know anyone in the city, but I was invited to this massive industry networking event.
Okay.
I walked into this beautiful historic hall, and there were easily 500 people there. Everyone was talking, laughing, clinking glasses.
A very busy room.
Incredibly busy. And I stood right in the middle of that room, completely surrounded by human beings, and I have never felt more profoundly disconnected in my entire life.
Wow.
My invisible wires were just dangling. I was physically close to people, but psychologically, I was on another planet.
That is a brilliant example, and I think it is such a universal experience, really.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
It perfectly captures the nuance we are trying to teach today, the stark difference between being physically alone and feeling socially disconnected.
Right, because I wasn't physically alone at all.
But you were lacking meaningful relationships in that specific moment. You can be standing shoulder to shoulder with people on a crowded train and feel completely disconnected.
Or you can be sitting entirely alone in your living room, reading a letter from an old friend, and feel incredibly connected.
Precisely. Which naturally leads us to the grand irony of our modern era and the next major insight from our personal research.
The paradox of the modern world.
Exactly. We are living in a world that is defined by connection. We have smartphones in our pockets, we have social media platforms, messaging apps, video calls.
They allow us to communicate instantly with someone sitting in a cafe in Tokyo while we are in New York.
We are, technologically speaking, more connected than any generation in the history of the human race.
Yet, paradoxically, loneliness is rising to pandemic levels.
It's a massive paradox. And for our B2 learners listening, a paradox is a situation that seems to contradict itself. It's a situation that defies logic.
We have built this entire global infrastructure designed to bring us together, but the sociological data shows we are feeling further apart.
Why is that? Well, our findings point to a very specific reason. These digital forms of communication often replace deep interaction.
Let's look closely at that word, interaction.
Wait, let me push back on that for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
If I am texting my best friend back and forth all day, sending memes, talking about a movie we just watched, aren't we interacting? Why does it matter if it is on a screen versus sitting in a living room?
It is a great question. You are interacting. Interaction simply means communication or activity between people.
Right.
If you break it down, the prefix inter means between, and action means doing something. So you are doing something together.
Okay, so a text message counts as an interaction.
It does. But our insight reveals that not all interactions are created equal. We have to introduce a vital distinction here.
The difference between shallow interaction and deep interaction.
Okay. That is where the nuance lies.
Yes. A shallow interaction is like the water at the edge of the beach. It barely covers your toes.
So, sending a quick text message with a smiley face emoji?
That is an interaction.
Liking someone's vacation photo on social media?
That is an interaction, but it is incredibly shallow. It takes almost zero emotional effort, and it doesn't reveal anything about how you are truly feeling underneath the surface.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
And because it is shallow, it often fails to create a real emotional connection.
Precisely. You might exchange 50 text messages with an acquaintance throughout the workday, but if those messages are just complaining about a boss or sharing funny videos, your brain does not register that as emotional support.
It is merely data exchange.
Yes, it is data. It is not a soul connection. And this brings us to the crucial concept of depth.
Depth. D-E-P-T-H. Depth is the noun form of the adjective deep. In our research, we noted a very specific, tragic, modern phenomenon. Someone may have thousands of online friends, hundreds of followers. Their phone is constantly buzzing with notifications.
But they still feel completely lonely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because those relationships lack emotional depth. Now, English learners usually learn the word depth when talking about physical space,
Like the depth of a swimming pool.
or the depth of a canyon. But native speakers frequently use depth metaphorically to talk about human emotions and relational seriousness.
When we say a relationship has depth, we mean it has layers. It has seriousness and profound emotional meaning.
A relationship with depth is one where you can safely talk about your fears, your failures, and your true hopes.
It is not just discussing what you had for lunch.
Right.
I actually experienced the reality of this a few years ago. I was looking at my professional network online, and I realized I had over 1,000 connections.
1,000, that's a lot.
It is. People I had met at conferences, people I had emailed. But when I went through a very difficult personal crisis, a serious family illness, I looked at that list of 1,000 people and realized there was maybe one person I felt comfortable calling to ask for help.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 1,000 shallow connections, but almost no depth.
That is terrifying when you actually stop and measure it like that. We encourage you, our listeners, to reflect on the depth of your own digital friendships.
Are they deep oceans of support, or are they shallow puddles of quick entertainment?
That's a great metaphor. Because our research shows that confusing a puddle for an ocean is exactly what is driving this loneliness pandemic.
And this lack of depth is not just making us sad.
No, it isn't.
It is actually making us sick.
This was the part of our research that amazed me the most.
The physical toll of loneliness, this is where the mind directly impacts the body, where the psychological becomes physiological.
Scientists and medical professionals now believe that loneliness severely affects physical health.
We are talking about a significantly increased risk of heart disease, strokes, clinical depression, and anxiety disorders.
I remember reading this part of our findings and being genuinely shocked. How does an emotion, a feeling of sadness, literally calcify an artery or trigger a heart attack?
Sounds almost superstitious at first.
It does, but the mechanism behind this is fascinating, and it centers around one specific vocabulary word: chronic.
Chronic.
The trigger for these severe health issues is not just feeling lonely for one afternoon, it is chronic loneliness.
Chronic is an essential vocabulary word for B2 learners, especially if you ever need to read medical news, discuss health, or talk about long-term societal issues.
It comes from the Greek root chronos, which means time.
Therefore, chronic describes something that continues for a long time and does not easily disappear. It is the exact opposite of temporary or acute.
So if you feel lonely because your partner went on a 2-week business trip, that is temporary loneliness.
Right, that is acute. It is a completely normal human emotion.
But if you move to a new country, fail to build a social circle, and feel disconnected and lack emotional depth for months or even years at a time,
That feeling settles into your nervous system.
that becomes chronic loneliness. It is a persistent, enduring state of being.
And here is the biology of why chronic loneliness is so dangerous. When you feel isolated, your brain perceives it as a threat.
Like a physical threat.
Yes. In ancient human history, being separated from the tribe meant you were probably going to be eaten by a predator. So your brain triggers a fight-or-flight response.
It releases stress hormones, like cortisol.
Exactly. In a temporary situation, cortisol is great. It helps you run away and survive. But when you are chronically lonely, your body is bathed in these stress hormones every single day.
That constant state of high alert causes massive inflammation in your body.
And that inflammation damages your heart and your immune system over time.
Which leads us to the most startling comparison we found in the data. Multiple medical studies now suggest that long-term chronic loneliness can be as harmful to your physical body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Just let that sink in.
15 cigarettes a day.
It is an incredible statistic. And linguistically, I want to highlight the grammatical structure you just used. As harmful as...
Right, as adjective as structure.
Native speakers use this structure to show equality between two things, usually to make a surprising comparison.
We aren't saying loneliness literally puts smoke in your lungs.
No. We are saying the biological damage caused by those chronic stress hormones equates to the exact same level of physical degradation that smoking a pack of cigarettes causes.
Using as harmful as insanity is such a brilliant way to express startling comparisons in English, because it grounds an abstract concept in a tangible reality.
Yes, you are taking something everyone universally understands is dangerous, which is smoking, and equating it with an invisible emotion.
It completely destroys the old idea that loneliness is just a personal weakness.
Exactly. And that realization completely changes how we view the problem on a societal level.
It definitely does.
When you realize that an emotion can cause that much measurable physical damage, it stops being a private, personal issue.
And this leads to the result of all this medical data. Major health organizations around the world are now treating loneliness as a public health issue.
A public health issue. Let's really explore the cultural weight of this phrase.
A public health issue is defined as a problem that affects the health of many people in society, rather than just isolated individuals.
But it means so much more than that in practice.
What happens when something gets that label?
When an illness is upgraded to a public health issue, it means governments, hospitals, city planners, and policymakers need to get involved to solve it.
It elevates a personal sadness to a society-wide emergency.
Right. A public health issue dictates how tax money is spent. Think about seatbelts in cars, or laws about clean drinking water, or anti-smoking campaigns.
Those are all public health issues.
Exactly. By categorizing loneliness in the exact same way, experts are arguing that society itself needs to fundamentally change how it operates in order to protect its citizens.
We cannot just tell lonely people to cheer up or try harder to make friends.
No, we have to look at the very structure of modern life.
That actually makes me think about why this is happening right now. If we know it's so dangerous, if it's literally destroying our bodies, why are we doing it to ourselves?
Well, it comes down to how we have engineered our modern world.
In our research, we identified 3 specific roots of modern isolation. 3 distinct sociological reasons why chronic loneliness is becoming the new normal.
Let's dive into the first reason. Modern life is becoming increasingly individualistic.
Individualistic. This is a fantastic, complex adjective for you to learn.
It describes societies that focus more on personal independence, self-reliance, and individual achievement than on community or group relationships.
Let's look at the suffix here. ISTIC.
When you add this to the noun individual, you are describing a broad characteristic or a behavioral trait of a whole culture.
I think this is especially true in Western cultures, and increasingly globally, really.
Oh, without a doubt.
In individualistic cultures, success is almost entirely defined by what you achieve on your own. Buying your own house, getting a personal promotion, building your personal brand.
Being financially independent so you never have to rely on anyone else.
The English language heavily reflects this worship of the individual. We praise people for being self-made. We admire people who are fiercely independent.
But in worshiping independence, we sometimes completely lose the value of dependence.
That's a really good point.
We forget that needing other people is not a weakness. It is a fundamental human trait.
For thousands of years, humans lived in collectivist structures. Multi-generational households, tight-knit villages, tribes.
The group was always prioritized over the individual.
But as global culture shifts toward the individualistic model, where everyone wants their own apartment, their own car, their own customized life, the community bonds inevitably start to weaken.
And people find themselves navigating life's brutal challenges entirely alone.
Which brings us perfectly to the second major root we uncovered, the breakdown of the support network.
Because we prioritize individual success, many people today are highly transient.
They move away from their hometowns.
Right. They move to new cities for a university education, or they relocate to entirely different countries for better career opportunities.
This mobility is incredible for the global economy, of course. But as a direct result, people lose their traditional support systems.
Let's define support network exactly as we framed it in our sociological findings.
A support network is a group of friends, family, or trusted colleagues who provide emotional help, practical assistance, and advice.
The word network is very interesting here. In modern English, B2 learners almost always learn network in relation to technology.
Like a Wi-Fi network or a cellular network.
Right. It represents interconnected machines sharing data.
But native speakers use this word just as frequently for human safety nets. A support network is an interconnected group of humans sharing emotional and practical weight.
Going back to your story about moving to London earlier.
Yeah, I had a great job. I was achieving my individualistic goals, but my support network was totally gone.
And what happens when things go wrong?
Well, I remember I got a flat tire on my bicycle in the freezing rain one Tuesday evening.
Oh, no.
I was miles from my apartment, and I stood there on the pavement holding my phone, realizing I had literally no one I could call to come pick me up.
That is such an isolating feeling.
It was. I had colleagues, sure, but you don't call a colleague you've known for 2 weeks to rescue you in the rain at night.
That is the perfect illustration. The people you can call at 2:00 a.m. when your car breaks down, or the people whose shoulder you cry on when you receive terrible medical news, that is your support network.
But building a new network from scratch as an adult in a new city is incredibly difficult and exhausting.
It leaves so many people highly vulnerable to the chronic loneliness we discussed earlier.
And what's truly insidious here is how the third reason complicates the second.
Because when you move away, when you lose your physical support network and you're sitting alone in a new apartment, what do you naturally turn to for comfort?
Technology. Your phone.
Exactly. But technology, as we found time and time again in our research, often creates an illusion of connection.
Let's look at that word carefully. Illusion.
An illusion is something that appears real but is actually not true. It is a trick of the mind.
Think of a magician pulling a rabbit out of an empty hat. Or a mirage in the desert, where you think you see a pool of water on a hot highway.
But as you get closer, it vanishes. It was never there.
And social media is arguably the greatest, most effective psychological illusion ever invented by mankind.
The psychology behind this illusion is brilliant, and that's exactly what makes it so dangerous.
When you spend 2 hours scrolling through a social media feed, you are looking at human faces. You are reading human thoughts.
You are seeing videos of your friends' vacations, their new babies, their dinners.
Your brain, which, remember, evolved over millions of years to thrive in small tribes, is completely tricked.
Your primitive brain thinks, I am surrounded by my tribe. I am looking at their faces. I am interacting with my community. I am safe.
But it is not true. It is a biological mirage.
Scrolling through social media may feel social in the moment, but it does not replace the physiological benefits of real conversations.
When you are scrolling, you are entirely passive. You are literally just staring at glowing pixels on a piece of glass in the silent room.
You aren't hearing the subtle tone of someone's voice. You aren't seeing their micro-expressions.
You aren't experiencing the shared energy and the physical stakes of being in the same room.
I used to think that video calls solved this, actually. I would think, well, I can see my friend's face on the screen. Isn't that just as good?
But it isn't, is it?
No. Even on a video call, the eye contact is slightly off because of the camera placement. There is a tiny audio delay. You can't reach out and touch the person.
For a B2 learner trying to master the cultural nuance of English, thinking of digital communication as an illusion of connection is a perfect way to grasp the depth of that vocabulary word.
It looks like a connection, it mimics connection, but when you turn the phone off and the screen goes black, the illusion shatters.
The loneliness is still sitting right there next to you on the couch.
That is the tragic reality of the illusion. It satiates our appetite for connection just enough that we don't go out and seek real relationships.
Much like eating junk food makes you feel full, but leaves you entirely malnourished.
If we synthesize these three roots, an individualistic society pushing us to be fiercely independent, the loss of physical support networks due to modern mobility, and the junk food illusion of connection provided by technology,
it is completely logical that a loneliness pandemic has emerged. It is the natural, inevitable consequence of how modern life is designed.
But I don't want us to end this deep exploration entirely on doom and gloom.
No, definitely not.
Because our research is not just a diagnosis of a terrible disease. We also explored the positive side of our findings, reclaiming our nature and finding actionable solutions.
Humans are incredibly resilient creatures. And because we now have the vocabulary and the data to understand what is causing the problem, this condition can be actively, purposefully reduced.
The first step to fixing it is acknowledging a fundamental biological truth about our species. Humans are naturally social beings.
A social being. I want to define this phrase very carefully for you because the words matter.
A social being is a living creature who absolutely requires interaction with others to remain healthy and sane.
The word being here is used as a noun, meaning an entity, a living organism.
When we say humans are social beings, we are making a hard biological statement.
We're not saying that socializing is just a fun, optional hobby like playing tennis on the weekends or collecting vintage stamps.
No, we're saying it is a biological requirement for survival. Exactly like a plant is a being that requires sunlight and water to photosynthesize, a human is a being that requires physical, emotional interaction.
This is hardwired into our DNA. You cannot positive think your way out of needing people.
And what fulfills that deep biological need? Meaningful relationships.
In our research, we found that meaningful relationships provide 3 specific, measurable psychological benefits for a human being. They make people feel understood, supported, and valued.
Those 3 adjectives are the antidote to the pandemic. Let's break them down.
Understood means someone sees who you truly are, flaws and all, and accepts you.
Supported means someone has your back. When times are difficult, they are your safety net.
Valued means your existence matters to someone. If you disappear tomorrow, their life would be measurably worse.
When you have relationships that provide those 3 feelings, your psychological and physical health thrives. The inflammation goes down. The cortisol drops.
But contrast this with the alternative. Without these connections, people feel isolated. Isolated. Let's really listen to the sound and origin of this word. Isolated.
This is a very strong, evocative B2 vocabulary word. It means separated from others, completely cut off.
Interestingly, it comes from the Latin word insula, which means island.
The exact same root gives us the word insulate.
Right. So when you feel isolated, you literally feel like a deserted island, surrounded by an ocean, completely cut off from the mainland of humanity.
I love that etymological breakdown, and I think it is important to point out a subtle but critical difference between being lonely and being isolated.
What's the main difference?
Well, loneliness is the subjective emotion, the inner ache or sadness. Isolation is the objective state of being separated.
So you could be isolated without being lonely.
Exactly. You can actually be isolated, say, a scientist living alone in a research cabin in Antarctica without feeling lonely, if you are someone who deeply enjoys extreme solitude.
Ah, I see. But in the context of our modern urban problem, involuntary isolation almost always breeds chronic loneliness.
So the ultimate question is, how do we build bridges from our individual islands back to the mainland?
How do we cure this feeling of being involuntarily isolated?
Our research detailed some very simple, actionable solutions to build stronger relationships.
And honestly, when you hear them, they might sound like common sense. But in our modern, fast-paced, screen-obsessed world, common sense requires immense, intentional effort.
The first action is simply spending more time with friends or family in person.
The key phrase there is in person. Remember, we are fighting the illusion of digital connection.
Spending time means dedicating actual hours of your day to physical presence. It means sitting across a physical table from someone, sharing a meal, going for a walk in the park.
It is about sharing space, breathing the same air, and giving someone your undivided attention, which is probably the most valuable resource we have in the 21st century.
The second action is joining clubs or community activities. This directly combats the loss of a support network we talked about earlier.
If you move to a new city, or if you just realize your current life lacks depth, you cannot just sit in your apartment and wait for a network to magically appear at your door.
You have to actively build it.
Joining a local running club, a pottery class, a volunteer organization, or even an in-person English language practice group forces you to engage in shared activities with a consistent group of people.
Consistent engagement is the secret ingredient there. You cannot build a relationship by seeing someone once a year.
It is the steady repetition of interaction, seeing the same faces every Tuesday evening, that eventually builds trust. And trust builds depth.
And that leads directly to the third actionable solution: forcing yourself to have deeper conversations instead of relying on online communication.
We talked earlier about shallow versus deep interaction.
Yeah.
If you want to stop feeling isolated, you must practice the very difficult art of real conversation.
You have to intentionally move past small talk.
Yes. This is so hard, especially when you are communicating in a second language, but it is so necessary.
Instead of just texting someone, "How was your day?" and accepting fine as an answer, you have to dig deeper.
You have to ask questions like, what was the most challenging part of your week? Or, you seemed really stressed yesterday. What is really going on?
It requires vulnerability. It requires you to be a little bit brave because you are asking the other person to be vulnerable with you.
What all the sociologists and psychologists in our findings are essentially saying is that the ultimate goal for a healthy life is not to maximize the quantity of your relationships, but to prioritize the quality.
It is not about having many relationships. It is about having meaningful ones.
A person with 3 deep, meaningful, in-person friendships is psychologically and physically much healthier than an influencer with 3 million online followers, but no one to call when they get a flat tire in the rain.
Humans need real connection, not just digital contact.
Real connection, not just digital contact. That perfectly summarizes the core of all the research we have explored today.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener?
Let's take a quick moment to recap the incredible journey we've been on today for this ESL listening practice. We have mastered some incredibly complex and culturally vital B2 vocabulary.
We started by redefining a heavy medical term, pandemic, and applying it as a metaphor to a psychological condition to validate unseen suffering.
We examine how the prefix "slow" creates the visual imagery of being disconnected like unplugged wires.
We also explored the great paradox of modern interaction, discovering that despite our technology, we often lack emotional depth.
We learned the vital difference between acute and chronic states, and how chronic loneliness biologically transforms into a massive public health issue requiring societal change.
We analyzed the sociological roots of the problem, looking at our individualistic cultural shift, the dangerous loss of our human support network, and the powerful psychological illusion of social media.
Finally, we remembered that we are biologically wired as social beings, and that to cure the feeling of being isolated on our own islands, we must pursue quality, real-world, in-person connections.
You have done a fantastic job tracking with this high-level, nuanced English analysis today.
It is a lot of complex vocabulary, and it's a heavy subject, but understanding these words gives you the power to articulate one of the most pressing issues of our time.
You are no longer just learning functional English, you are learning how to discuss the human condition.
And as we wrap up our analysis today, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
It builds on the findings we discussed, but it pushes it one step further into the future of human society.
Ooh, I love a good thought experiment to end on. What is it?
We established today that loneliness is a purely psychological condition. It is processed in the mind. And we established that current technology, like social media and video calls, only offers an illusion of connection because it lacks physical presence, micro-expressions, and depth.
Right.
But technology is advancing at a terrifying speed. Our brains process feeling isolated psychologically. Will future virtual reality technology ever be able to perfectly mimic the depth of a real-world hug?
That's wild to think about.
If the VR headset is visually perfect and the suit simulates touch perfectly, will our minds eventually lose the ability to tell the difference between a highly advanced digital illusion and true human connection?
Or is there something fundamentally, ineffably biological about sharing the exact same physical space, breathing the same air, that code and pixels will simply never be able to replicate?
Exactly.
Wow. That is a heavy, fascinating, slightly terrifying question to leave you with. Can technology ever truly replace the mainland? Or will we just be highly entertained, isolated islands dreaming of connection?
Think about that as you practice your English this week.
Thank you so much for joining us for this ESL listening practice. Your mission for today is simple. Take the vocabulary you learned, go out into the real world, put your phone in your pocket, look someone in the eye, and have a deep, meaningful, real-world conversation in English today.
You're a social being, so go socialize.
See you next time.